Good evening, good afternoon. This is Moshe Goldberg from Brit Olam, the Noahide World Center, starting our third interactive conference. Welcome to those of you from near and far who are with us. We have two very worthwhile and interesting speakers tonight, as we announced. Before we start, I have two announcements that I want to make. The first one is our next broadcast. Set aside the date, February 17th, 4 weeks from today, Sunday, February 17th. We will be sending out details of this broadcast. We're lining up also several speakers for this. The other, I think, is a very interesting announcement that I have. As we said, our earlier broadcasts are available for viewing on our website. Now we have a third way, or another way of seeing our previous broadcasts. On the Roku channel, on the Menorah channel on Roku, Jim Long has started putting up our broadcasts, and we expect and hope that these two broadcasts, or this broadcast today, the two lectures today, will also be put on the Roku channel, the Menorah channel on Roku. We thank Jim Long for the opportunity to put our lectures there, and we hope to have a long association with Jim about this. Now let's get to tonight's lectures. The first lecture is by Phil Chernofsky. Phil was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He was active in Bnei Akiva and later with NCSY. He studied at Yeshiva University, the high school, the college, and the grad school. He taught Jewish studies, math, and science at the Yeshiva of Central Queens. He made Aliyah in 1981. He's the father of 3 daughters, Baruch Hashem, all married with children, all 3 of them living in Israel. Phil Chernofsky is the educational director of the Orthodox Union's OU Israel Center in Jerusalem, and he's the founder and editor of the Torah Tidbits weekly Torah magazine. Since 1998, he has also hosted Torah Tidbits audio on Arutz Sheva, Israel National News, and our radio, OU Radio, lessons from the weekly Torah portion with witty insights and with music. Phil Chernofsky will talk now about the subject, Beyond the Seven Mitzvot.
Thank you, Moshe, and good evening to those listening. I don't apologize for saying good evening, because whenever I call my cousin in the States, the secretary picks up the phone and she says, "Good afternoon," and I said, "How can you say that about 10 after 8 at night," etc., etc. Okay. Beyond the 7, I am assuming that you have the basics of the 7 Noahide laws, and there are a few directions to go when you speak of going beyond them. First is an analysis by Dr. Aaron Lichtenstein in a book on the 7 Noahide laws, where he takes to task the comparison of the Jewish concept of 613 commandments in the Torah versus the 7 Noahide laws. He says that's not a fair comparison mathematically, and he explains why. He says that each of the 7 Noahide laws connect or link to more than one of the 613 mitzvot in the Torah, which are incumbent upon the Jewish people. And some of them, for example, the one simple 3-letter word, one of the 7 Noahide laws called gezel, theft, is linked to 16 different commandments in the Torah, various and sundry nuances on the theme of theft. For example, a difference between stealing and robbing, and cheating in business, and misleading and misrepresenting, are all specified by different commandments in the Torah. When it came to the summary for what we, the Jewish people, feel is incumbent upon all people of the world, they were sort of shrunk in number, and a chapter heading called theft, a chapter heading called murder, a chapter heading called idolatry were sufficient to summarize that which we consider incumbent upon all people of the world. But, as Dr. Lichtenstein explains in his book, one should not think that we're talking about a ratio of mitzvot of 613 to 7. We are actually talking about 613 to close to 70. That changes the ratio. Not only that, he says among the 613 mitzvot, a majority of them do not apply in our time without a Beit HaMikdash, without a temple in Jerusalem, and many other conditions necessary for many of the 613 mitzvot to be active, and those would not be incumbent upon non-Jews anyway, even if we had a temple in Jerusalem. And therefore, he says the actual ratio is more like 277 to 66, which translates to approximately 4 to 1. So rather than think in terms of 613 commandments for the Jewish people and only 7 for the Ben Noach, the non-Jews of the world, think in terms of a quarter, 1/4 of all the mitzvot in the Torah that are practiced in our time are incumbent upon non-Jews as well. And a Ben Noach is a non-Jew who has accepted upon himself or plans to accept upon himself the yoke of the requirements according to Hashem Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel, and for the sake of the God of Israel, and that's what we're talking about. Now, it goes even further than that, because there are additional mitzvot, according to different opinions in the Talmud, of other commandments which Bnei Noach, non-Jews, are also required to follow, not on the same level of culpability as the 7, but nonetheless required. For example, there's a very nice book by Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, where he enumerates several mitzvot that different opinions in the Talmud say are obligatory on the non-Jew. Just to use one example, oaths and vows. Oaths and vows don't necessarily fit into the existing list of 7 mitzvot, but they are nonetheless incumbent upon the non-Jew according to some opinions. Honoring of parents. Honoring of parents is a famous Talmudic issue that complements various non-Jews for and praises them for their high level of respect for parents, and yet that's not on the list of the 7 Noahide laws, and yet according to our sources, all people of the world, not just the Jewish people, are required to show respect to their parents. Now there's something general which should be known, and since this is the 3rd session of this kind of series, I don't know how much has been explained earlier, but I'll say the following. Whenever there is a commandment that is applicable to the Jew as well as to the non-Jew, the details of those commandments are not necessarily identical. I don't have time to go into those details. Maybe in some future talk you'll have it from another lecturer, or me if I get invited back again. But you have commandments which have a rigorous set of what we call halachot, individual laws and details, which might not match, and probably doesn't match, the same commandment in the non-Jewish context. That does not change the fact that a non-Jew studying the 7 Noahide laws and all that we consider to be incumbent upon him should not study these details and know the differences between one or the other. Now I'd like to make an analogy. Please follow me on this and see what we get from it. I recently gave a talk to a group of women, Jewish women, and the topic was grace after meals which we call Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after a meal, and specifically that which is known as Zimun. Zimun is the invitation of one person to a minimum of two others to join together to say the grace after the meals. This is generally known in Jewish circles as a male thing. 3 men who eat together, minimum of 3 men, quote, bench mizuman. They have one person leading the service, and they invite the other 2 or more to join them. Now, one of the things that I taught was the response to the call to say grace together is an equal requirement for men and for women. Most of the women were flabbergasted. They said, what? I never thought this was for me. They would sit at a table when there were 3 men participating in this ritual. They would say their own private grace after the meals, their own Birkat Hamazon, but they did not know that when the leader calls upon the assembled to join him, they have to respond the same way with the statement, Yehi Shem Hashem Mevorach Me'atav Yad Olam, may God's name be blessed forever and ever. Now this I'm using just as an analogy, because sometimes you grow up in a religious atmosphere and you go to school and you learn things, and specifically women sometimes are not aware of the scope of their requirements. This is what I am talking now, not to women, Jewish women, but I am talking to non-Jews, B'nai Noach, with the same message, that there are some times where you will have, let's say, the rudiments of the 7 Noahide laws, and you will have the list, idolatry, adultery, murder, limb from a living animal, theft, blasphemy, and the catch-all called dinim, legislative laws. And then you'll hear somebody say, but a non-Jew has to also, like I mentioned already, respect his parents. And even non-Jews who know that that is something that people do, and that's not exclusively Jewish, might not be aware of the fact that according to Talmudic law, many authorities consider it obligatory upon the Ben Noach. Now there's a difference between something that a person does to be nice, that a person does intuitively because it's a good thing to do, and when you have a system of law, to know that this is not just something that you're doing to be nice, but this is something that is part of an obligation that should not take away. Let me give you a totally minor example, but it's a fascinating one. When a person takes a ride in a taxi, in essence, he is hiring a driver with his car to perform a service. The Torah requires that one pay a person who does a service for you on time. On time for a taxi ride means at the conclusion of the ride, the taxi driver reads the meter and he says, you owe me whatever it is, 25 shekel and 30 agarot, or $5.55, doesn't matter. And of course you pay, because that's what people do. Very relatively few people, I imagine, stiff a taxi driver. But the point is that there is a commandment in the Torah to the Jew to pay the taxi driver at the end of the ride. So a person will say, yeah, but I do that anyway. Of course I'm going to do it. What do you think? I'm going to walk away from the cab? I'll get hit over the head with a baseball bat. That's not the point. The point is that when you have a commitment to a system of God's laws, be it the Jewish commitment to the Torah or the Ben Noach's commitment to Seven Mitzvot, the 7 Noahide laws, then part of that commitment is learning and knowing what is included in these obligations, and to do things not just because you're doing them anyway, but to add to that the dimension of doing it on purpose for the fulfillment of God's command. I want to now go in a different direction. How am I doing on time, Moshe?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
You also have a question that you might
well, that's very small print over there. If the details are different, then are they the
Bob
same?
Wells said 3 sentences.
Okay.
Read them all.
70 laws are halacha of mitzvot or are mitzvot. Okay. What I meant is, well, it's a tricky thing. Let's say Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, 7 Noahide laws, is better translated as 7 categories of command. Each category has subdivisions which more closely match the Jewish concept of mitzvot. So I am not talking about halacha, which I defined as further details. I am talking about mitzvot by the definition of the Torah's 613 mitzvot, and the 7 Noahide laws consist of close to 70 of those. In addition to those 70, there are a myriad, countless probably, of details, and those, as I mentioned, are not the same between Jew and non-Jew always. Now, you also wrote, many of the details of the laws are different for Jews and Gentiles. If the details are different, then are they the same commandment? I would say yes. I mean, if there's a command to not eat limb from a living animal, and there is a technicality where an animal that is slaughtered by Jewish ritual slaughter, shechita, is considered dead after the slaughter is performed, even if the animal, pardon me for being a little graphic, continues to twitch. Then there happens to be a detail that for a non-Jew, since he is not required to do ritual slaughter, then the animal has to be dead and still in order to be considered not a problem of taking limb from a living animal. It's the same command, limb from a living animal. The details are a little bit different. And you would find this in many, many other areas. A very significant area, which I can't go into in detail, is the topic of belief in a single God, and yet considering him to have partners or helpers. That's called in Jewish terminology shituf, partnership with God, which for a Jew is a very serious problem, where our belief in God's unity is an absolute unique unity, and there are opinions that say that a non-Jew, if he believes in God as the supreme being, might have a little bit more flexibility in what else he believes. Let's leave it at that because it gets a little vague.
Yeah, 2 more questions. Go right ahead.
Okay, let's take a look. Luigi, privately.
Yeah, that's okay.
I can
That's
read
okay.
it.
That's.
I have a question. Different rabbis include different details and sub-precepts. How can we know what exactly are the correct details? Very important question, and I'm not going to answer it, but I'll tell you the following. And this is something that has a counterpart in Judaism as well. When you have 2 opinions in the Talmud, and you have the commentaries on the Talmud not ready to say the law is like this one or like that one, then how do you behave? Do you say, well, not everybody agrees that I have to do that, so I'm not going to do it? Or do you say, there is an opinion, a respected opinion, a significant opinion, that says I should do something, so even if not everybody agrees, I'm going to do it, or I'm going to learn about it. That's an attitude, and again, using an analogy from my childhood, I remember when my mother especially would say, well, I'm not going to say no, but I'm not going to say yes. I'm leaving it up to you what to do. You'll know what's right. I hated that. I wish my mother would have said, do this, don't do that. But when she said something like that, then your leaning and your inclination and your personality comes in and says, what difference does it make to me that Rabbi X in the Talmud does not include this as a requirement for a Ben Noach? If I am a serious Ben Noach, then I am going to pursue this particular mitzvah as well, provided you ask the right authorities who say, yes, you're allowed to pursue it. So that's the way I would answer it.
Okay, one last question.
One last question. Is there any consequence for a non-Jew not keeping those additional commandments? All right, that sort of follows from what I've just said. Same thing in Judaism. If there is an area of optional observance, then there's not really a consequence for non-observance. Let me use again the analogy of women, since there are many mitzvot that women are exempt from, and yet many women accept upon themselves some of the commandments for which they are exempt. A classic example is shofar, the ram's horn, on Rosh Hashanah. That many women don't even know that they are technically exempt from, because women throughout the generations accepted it upon themselves, and it's tantamount to being obligatory. For a Ben Noach, he has that right to, or discretion to say, look, this everybody agrees is required, I'll pursue it. This, some say yes, some say no, it's a little hard, maybe I won't do it, or it's appealing, maybe I will do it. And it's a judgment kind of call, and if you can't make that judgment by yourself, then advisors should help, or a rabbi who knows what he's talking about should help, so that you know which direction to go in.
You can make the last one, and that's it.
Okay.
Again, Chesliya.
If there are acts not included in the fundamental seven, does that make it totally permissible? No. No, just as in Judaism we have different levels of obligation. There are things that are capital offenses for one who violates. There are other things that are corporal offenses. There are some things that should not be done and are not adjudicated by a human court, but they are considered to be the domain of God. In other words, who are you fooling? If there's something which we believe is incumbent upon all people of the world, and therefore a Ben Noach should accept it upon himself, whether he can be punished by a Sanhedrin, which we don't have at the moment anyway, or he'll be accountable to God, what's your choice there? If you're sincere, then you will pursue that which is considered to be either incumbent or highly recommended. And again, it's a matter of personality. There are times where someone will say, a Jew will say, well, tell me if it's forbidden. If it's not forbidden, I don't have to listen. And others will say, I need more than that. If it's not forbidden, is it a desirable thing not to do, or the opposite, to do? Is it required? Is it permitted? Is it preferred? A sincere Jew, or a sincere anybody, should take those things into account and act accordingly.